So I do have a list, and we're going to talk about like about 20 give or take plants. Most of them are pretty easy to identify. There's not deadly lookalikes. There's a couple lookalikes we'll talk about, but they're not really that lookalikes. So they're pretty easy. So but this is mainly an intro class to foraging. With the idea that we're going to talk about some easy things to forage, some things like that. But most part, we're going to break it down to like what you can forage month by month, and that's the general point of this class. Is not so much that you're an expert forager, but you know what can be foraged each month, and then you can kind of do more research and try to join foraging groups and clubs and stuff, and just try to build your own knowledge. But this is more about just kind of showing you what's available throughout the DC. This one being my favorite, service berries. We'll talk about that definitely today. But yeah, there's a lot of really great things, a lot of delicious things. But so this is this is the schedule for the DPR Advanced Grower webinar series. So it goes all throughout the summer. I apologize, I wasn't allowed to use Eventbrite anymore. I think it's like a government thing, so we had to use our own online registration. So a lot of people have been having trouble. So just let me know if you do. We have an IT tech support team that can help you register with any classes. And if you don't get into the class, you join the waiting list. You should get the video and all that stuff. And we may make room for more people as we start judging to see how many people actually show up who say they're going to show up. But and a couple classes, if you're still, so a couple really more in-depth classes around foraging. So there's a foraging mushroom class, and these people are awesome. They've taught classes with foraging classes before, and they're really, really well done. Like if you really want to get some good solid education on mushrooms, I would suggest that. We're going to talk about a couple different mushrooms, a couple easy mushrooms. We're not going to get too in depth, but yeah, definitely check out that class if you. All right. So as I was saying, this is not meant to be like your main guide, this is just to get kind of intro to just hear about and think about, what plants are out there, when do they ripen, and then hopefully it is foraging. Foraging is something you have to take seriously. I mean, it's not something to be scared of, but it's just, but it is something that you're going to have to spend some time learning. A lot of this is going out with, finding different groups, foraging groups. There's a great, Maryland, Forage Maryland group. There's foraging meetup groups, Baltimore, Reston. There's this is a really great, if you're into mushrooms, Mycological Association of Washington, D.C. or MAL. This place, they meet once a month. They're a mushroom group, and they do what's called forays, where they actually will take you out and they'll forage with you to spots they know mushrooms are there, and they'll help you try to identify and learn. So these are the things that you kind of need to do to really understand, to really lock down and be able to identify a lot of things. There's a lot of great classes like Matt's Habitats. He does a lot of foraging walks, low red bird botanicals. That's the herbalist that teaches with us a lot, Holly Apolcavana. She does a lot of great walks. Cultivate the City does they do service berry and pawpaw walks and stuff like that. Yeah, and these are two really great books. I know this one's in the Northeast, but I have a lot of friends that really love this book. It's a little bit off climate wise. For the most part though, it's pretty dead on. And this is another really great book. But yeah, definitely. But the main thing about when you're foraging, you need to 100% be 100% sure of what you're eating. You don't want to just be like, I guess this is probably it, and eat it, because it's, there's a lot of bad things to eat out there in the world. So the idea, especially if this is your first time, your first time identifying something like a service berry, it's really recommended to not only be able to identify it with the clues that you have with the books and stuff that you've read, but also to get a second opinion. And that opinion could be it could be a plant app. There's this really great plant app called iNaturalist, where you can actually post things, and there's a whole plant community that will give you, feedback and let you know what it is. And there's some really knowledgeable, professor and horticulture experts people on that will give you some really great advice. Or just posting it on a Facebook group and then just getting some comments and stuff. It's good. Just get a second opinion for that. And really, when you're in doubt, just don't do it. Only eat it when you're when you feel pretty confident about what you're about to eat. So, all right, that's my disclaimer. Oh wow! So someone said, Jeff says, by the way, Matt of Matt's Habitats is the chief forager for MAWL for the Mycological Association of Washington. That's awesome. Yeah, that guy sounds so cool. I need to take some of his walks. Um, Cool. So what to bring? So let's say you're going, you're getting ready to forage. I mean, some of the stuff we're going to talk about is we're actually going to be able to forage in our garden, like different weeds and stuff. Some of these things that we're going to be able to forage just like walking down the street, But a lot of these things you got to go into like some more forested areas like Rock Creek and Potomac and places like that. So definitely some of the things that are helpful. Like we'll talk a little bit about some root crops, so having like root tools you can actually pull the roots out, like dandelions. Dandelions, the roots are really nutritious and good. So but they're a pain in the butt to pull out unless you have a tool. It's good to have some knives, shovels, things like this. I really love these like hori horis. So there is it's like it looks like a crazy knife. It's actually more like a hand trowel so much, but with a serrated knife edge. So you can cut things, but you can also, it's mainly used to dig up things. Those are really great tools. You're having different kinds of bags and like, bags, plastic bags are fine. Some of the things that are more delicate things like morels and stuff, you don't want to stick in a plastic bag because they'll rot really quickly. You want to have like mesh bags and stuff and breathable bags. And other things, like if you're picking berries, you don't want to put those in a plastic bag. You need to have, like whether it's an empty milk, gallon jug or something like that, or some kind of container that's going to protect them from getting squished. And then, gear, check the weather, wear appropriate gear. If it's the summer, you got to worry about pests. Usually in the spring and the fall and the winter, it's not that big of a deal. But like, summer, mosquitoes, tick check, especially if you're getting into the brush, like some of these places that you can harvest. I mean, most part, you don't have to like get crazy into the brush to harvest most of the things that we're going to talk about. But some of the things, you may have to. So if you are, you might want to think about doing like tick checks in the summer. Just a quick little, if you ever do get a tick, the correct way to pull them off, you don't ever want to like squeeze them at the base, because that just like squeezes, stuff back into you. You always want to like grab them by the head with tweezers, or I usually prefer doing a credit card. You just get a credit card and kind of flip in and just flip them off. Don't burn them or a match tip or anything like that. Just pull them off gently by the head. And then sorry, I don't want to scare people, but just a couple things to think about. If you're down by the Potomac River, so I was actually just like many years ago, I was foraging with my girlfriend at the time, and we were picking wine berries. We're gonna talk about wine berries. I love wine berries, and they're so plentiful in DC. But we were like, we weren't we had we had like flip-flops on. We were like, right in the middle of the wineberry bushes just because we couldn't get enough of them. We were just harvesting so many of them. And she actually got bit by a snake. It was actually a copperhead, and she had to like get an antidote and stuff. It was, it was not fun. But looking back at it, I mean, it's not, I don't want to scare anybody, but I did some research, and there are copperheads. They're the only venomous snakes in DC, and they're only really along the Potomac River area. They're not like all over DC, and they're not really a big deal. But if you're down that area, especially if you're planning on going into like crazy brush, just wear some boots and things like that, and long pants, or just don't get in the brush. We could have picked a ton of wineberries in our flip-flops without getting in there. Like we just got greedy. And just so we want to be able to like see what you're stepping on and things like that, or just take a stick and kind of scare things out of a bush before you dive into it. But like I said, I mean, most of the time you don't even have to get anywhere close to that. That was just like, that's a crazy example I was just going to give, just of if you're down foraging in the Potomac, I recommend wearing shoes and things like that. So but anyway, again, not to scare you all, but that was a freak thing, and anyway, and then a lot of this is just like patience. A lot of this is just like meditation, like we call like forest bathing and things like that. Like the people that are going to be teaching the mushroom foraging class, I mean, they talked about how they spent like 6 months just like going out in the woods and just not even picking anything, just like walking around, observing things and identifying things, and just like being quiet and just walking and absorbing it all and stuff. And so a lot of this is very therapeutic, and this, even if you don't find things to eat, it's still about trying to create this a meaningful experience, regardless. Oh, so Jeff says best tick removal tool, tick twister, about 40. Yeah, I actually saw that. It's like a little plastic, kind of like grappling thing. Yeah, yeah. $4 on Amazon. Yeah, that's definitely worth it for sure. Um, all right, and then the last thing I want to talk about things to avoid while trampling through the woods is it's a good idea to understand what poison ivy looks like. It's definitely it's just a good thing to know in general, even if you're not even going to the woods, because it's all over. A lot of poison ivy tends to sprout up when there's a lot of human activity, like trails and stuff. It's almost like a lot of people say it's like nature's defense against humans or something, but I don't know. But it's really easy to actually identify. This is what helps me when to identify it is I look at the so the leaves of three. They could be in vines or they could be in giant shrubs. They can climb up trees and stuff. But that they are like I do notice that they're a lot more prevalent around paths and stuff when people are well-worn paths as opposed to if you're just walking straight in the woods. But what I notice is I look at the bottom leaves and I pretend like they're mittens. So these are two, like that's the thumb and that's the thumb. They're like two mittens that are kind of like together, like they're about to clap or something like that. Like the wrists are touching, and that's how I mean. Ever since I figured that out, it's super easy to identify poison ivy. Just look for the three leaves, and then look for like the two mittens with the thumbs on the bottom, like that. Um, and then like it could be red in the spring, it could be yellow and stuff in the fall, so it's different colors. There's white berries and stuff like that. But there's this really great video on what to it's called a retired scientist explains the trick to never getting poison ivy rash again, which is a long title and it's a homemade video, but it really makes sense. So the sap that's on this poison ivy, a lot of times we think of it as just like normal sap that we can just wash off with some hand soap, and it's more like a grease tar substance where you get it. You not only want to wash, you want to have a good soap that can handle like greasy substance, like dishwasher soap works really great, or this Technu stuff, works really well. And you want to wash it off, and then you want to take a wet cloth and then kind of just scrub it off, just kind of wipe it off as well. And that and like he shows this demonstration when he actually has like this, he has this black substance that's very similar to poison ivy, and it really it's a great video to really understand how poison ivy works and how to like actually wash it off successfully. But the main thing though is don't ever take a hot shower after you touch poison ivy, because it opens up your pores and then it gets like, yeah, it gets spread a lot. Interesting fact, wherever you see poison ivy, you see this plant called jewelweed. And jewelweed, it's a really beautiful, like it's a little tiny flower, but it sprouts up whenever whenever there's like big patches of poison ivy, and which is ironically, I mean, it's a medicinal plant. You can actually crush it up and the flowers and the sap and stuff, and you can make a tincture or make or whatever you call it when you chew things up, and it will actually it's actually an antidote to poison ivy. It will actually to start breaking down the poison ivy things and the reactive chemicals. So I found that's really cool that nature kind of puts those plants right next to poison ivy plants. But, okay, so one more. So that's all right. Xanthil is the best poison ivy, oak, and sumac tree. So much better than Technu, or use palm or olive oil dishwasher detergent with vigorous scrubbing and also surfactant. Awesome. I'll have to check out Xanthef. I've never heard of that. And yeah, definitely. I mean, scrubbing's a big one. Using like a dish soap and then just scrubbing it off is pretty key. Don't just like treat it like you're just washing your hands. All right, and then some things to avoid when you're harvesting. Definitely like you want to be careful where you're picking your things that you're going to eat. Don't pick things from like polluted areas, the areas that are going to have a lot of runoff. Like parks that have a lot of dogs that are going to be peeing on things. Places that might use pesticides or herbicides. Like if you're picking, like you want to avoid private property unless you have permission. But if you have permission, you want to ask about what kind of treatments they're using and things like that. And yeah, and also like I always see all these people talking about like grill gardeners talking about like gardening and tree boxes, and I think ornamentals are great in tree boxes, but there's a lot of dog urine that goes in that. Like one day I was driving around and I saw a chicken of the woods, a mushroom. We're going to talk about that today. It's a delicious mushroom that tastes just like chicken if you cook it right. I saw a big chunk of it on a tree box. It's hanging off a tree, like a low, where obviously it's been peed on for like, probably years, and I had to leave it. I mean, it hurt so bad because I love chicken in the woods, but there was probably so much, especially mushrooms just absorb so much that it was probably so much dog urine in that mushroom. So, yeah, I just want to be careful, go out to clean places like, Rock Creek Park and Woods area, parks that, that isn't being treated or is clean, your backyard, things like that. So, right, and then we want to think about like sustainability foraging. So a lot of these things that we're foraging are very important parts of our ecosystem. So we don't want to just take it all. We want to actually respect the ecosystems, respect the commons, respect that you're not the only forager, respect that there's a lot of plants that like we're going to talk about ramps, and you can totally forage ramps, but but we need to do it in a sustainable way, or we're not going to have any more ramps. Like we're literally like destroying the whole species of ramps by over harvesting them. So we'll talk about different ways to say sustainably harvest ramps later on in the presentation. But yeah, so I mean, definitely like look for plants that have a lot of things. Like a lot of weeds. We'll talk about a lot of like garden weeds and stuff. Yeah, harvest a bunch of those. Like I mean, they're so plentiful. Invasive plants. If you, it's actually a good thing to completely harvest invasive plants. Like, the more wine berries you pick, the less birds are going to eat them and drop seeds all over the city. Mulberries, there's a certain invasive mulberries. The more we eat, the less it's going to be, traveling all over. So that's great. And a lot of things, we don't want to necessarily dig them completely up. We want to leave some of it so it keeps on producing. Like a lot of mushrooms will keep on producing if you cut it at the base. A lot of like fiddleheads, like these ferns, these baby ferns, they're super delicious. If you harvest too many of them, you're literally going to kill the root system. So that's why you only take a couple per cluster. So it's just about kind of learning how to be more sustainable, learning how to respect local wildlife, and just also leaving no trace, and learning about protecting our ecosystems. And I do have to mention though, I mean, if you are going into like a national parks like Rock Creek, we're going to mention like Rock Creek and then a lot of national parks. It's actually illegal to harvest things or to take anything from parks. I know there's been a lot of conversations in the past about trying to allow sustainable foraging and stuff, and everyone still forages. It's still I mean, I respect it because we need to be sustainably foragers. We need to in this kind of the laws are there not so much for people taking a little bit for people just like over harvesting and things like that, and destroying the ecosystems. Yeah, there has been talk about like allowing a certain amount of foraging, and like I said, everyone still forages. I just want to throw that out there just in case if you're foraging and the park ranger comes up, you might get a ticket. So just to give you a heads up. But all right, so that's I believe that's the last of my disclaimers. So you got snakes and ticks and tickets. Anyway, so now we're going to move on and talk about fun stuff. So talk about all the awesome things that we can forage. So I tried to create this. So this is a new presentation. It's a work in progress. Goal was, like I said, I wanted to try to talk about just kind of easy things to forage, a handful of things each month, just kind of look at. We're not going to go too in depth in each one of these plants. Yeah. We're not going to go too in depth. I'll probably just give a couple tips or a couple things about each plant. But like I said, the main thing is just understanding what to forage each month, and then you can kind of do your own research and kind of like and you can kind of dive a little bit deeper. But these are my best guess. But with the plant world, I mean, you can't predict the plant world. I mean, there's so many different factors, from like the temperatures are different every year, rainfall, sunlight, invasives, that are taking over other invasives. Like a big example, wine berries. Like I used to harvest wine berries a lot in like late June, and now it seems like it's like mid-July, and I think a lot of that is because like porcelain berry, another invasive, is like completely taken out. Like the patches I go to now are completely covered. Like it's ironic because wineberry is an invasive, and then porcelain berry is another invasive that's more aggressive, that's actually taking it over. So that's like kind of pushing the harvest season back a little bit because it's got to struggle to get nutrients and things. And So there's a lot of factors, that could change this stuff, and but so these are just kind of my best guess. But take it how it is, and it may be, off by, a little bit. But anyway, and we're going to start in March because I don't really know anything to harvest over the winter. I'm sure there are things over the winter. There's a lot of things. I've been doing a lot of. I did a bunch of research for this, and there's an insane amount of things that you can harvest that I just haven't tried. But everything that I included on this presentation, I've either personally harvest or I have friends that harvest. So I know that for the fact that there's actually in DC, and then they're findable. But I'll show you some things. We'll have some charts and stuff towards the end of the presentation of just like an insane amount of other things that supposedly are in DC that I don't know about. But anyway, so I kind of divided each slide into things that we could harvest in the garden, like different weeds that if you have your garden, different weeds that come up that are really nutritious. Some of the most nutritious plants in our garden are actually weeds. Then edible wild plants that you can find, whether walking around your block or going into forest, and then different edible mushrooms at the end. So it kind of starts off. We have a couple of different weeds that are that are going to be showing up, in March. So they probably might still be around, depending on some of them. But like dead nettle is definitely a great one. It's really easy to identify. It's got those purple flowers. It's really beautiful when you see like a whole field of dead nettle. It's just like this like purple wave of like purple and green. They're in the mint family, so that they have these like square stalks. That's one way you can kind of tell. But the purple is a dead giveaway. And a lot of people will eat them. You can eat them raw. Like the leaves and things like that. People will make pestos and stuff out of them. They're real delicious. Another one's like dandelions. So this is like people treated dandelions as these like horrible weeds forever because they're so hard to get rid of. When you try to pull them out, if you just a little bit of the root breaks off, and then it's going to grow back into another dandelion, and it's going to send seeds, and we have tons of dandelions. So they're pretty hardy plant. But every part of the dandelion is actually edible. The roots, the leaves, the flowers, all that stuff. Only problem is it gets really, really bitter once it starts to warm up. So that's why I definitely recommend if you're foraging dandelions, do it in like March or April. Usually about now or so, and definitely throughout the summer. It's just going to get super, super bitter. That doesn't mean you can't still eat it, but I wouldn't eat it raw unless you like the bitter. I would definitely, cook it down. When you cook things, you break down a lot of the things that are making it bitter. But the root systems, there's this big chunky root system right in the middle that is really tender. If you just peel it off, and you can saute that, and it's a really, really delicious root. Chickweed is another great one but again, that one's it's only good when it's cool out. Once it starts flowering, it will start getting very bitter, and it will eventually, a lot of it will die over the summer. And some of these things though will come back briefly in the fall for a second harvest, but for the most part, chickweed is something you want to get in before it gets too hot, before it starts flowering. But chickweed pesto is real delicious. I think it's a very grassy, kind of taste. So I don't really like it, raw, but I like it in like pestos and things like that. And then wood sorrel. So it looks like clover. So if you look at the difference between the two, so you have so it's basically because wood sorrel leaves are hearts. So you have three hearts. As opposed to clovers, you just have these circles as but even if you mix it up, clover is actually edible. I mean, I've never actually done anything with clover, but if you mix it up and actually eat some clover instead of wood sorrel, that's fine. Wood sorrel it's got this sour kind of it's got a lot of this oxalic acid. So it's one of those things you can't eat too much of it unless you cook it. Once you cook it, it breaks down a lot of these acids. Like a lot of our really leafy greens, like kale and collards and things like that, have that acid. And some people it doesn't bother them, but other people like they have to cook the greens if they don't want a stomach ache. And this is very similar to wood sorrel, but it's great. I mean, for raw, I'll just pinch a couple of them and just put them in my mouth. Especially when you're thirsty, and it just gives it a nice sour taste to it. Or put some in a glass of water. But if I'm eating a lot of it, I'm going to want to cook it down. And then moving outside of your garden, moving to more like edible wild plants. So the first one's fiddlehead ferns. And ferns in general are so amazing. If you ever seen like a baby fern, it's just like what fiddleheads are basically baby ferns. They're these like and so the whole fern just kind of like wraps up itself into the seed and just kind of unravels into these beautiful like these spirals. It's just really, yeah, it's really beautiful. Um, and you can harvest these guys. So the fiddlehead ones that are edible come from ostrich fern, and that's where a lot of our ferns in this area are ostrich ferns. I was doing a bunch of research on these lookalikes. The closest lookalikes that are kind of, are somewhat toxic are cinnamon and interrupted ferns. But these are completely covered with this like white fuzzy encasing, so it'd be pretty hard to misplace the two. But if you ever see a fern that's going to be completely covered in this like woolly cloth, yeah, avoid those. I'm not even sure if they're in this DC area. I was just researching it and I didn't have enough. I couldn't figure out if they were actually in DC or not. But I have seen a lot of fiddle ferns in DC, especially like Rock Creek Park and stuff. But this is one of those plants you don't want to harvest too much. When you ever see a cluster of them, it's all coming from one root system, and if you harvest all of it, the root system is actually going to die. It's ideally you just want to take a couple, per cluster. There's usually a bunch of clusters around too. So, but yeah, that's one of those you don't want to over harvest if possible. And you can steam it and saute it and things like that are real delicious. Then cattail shoots are another one. So have you ever seen these? I mean, a lot of people call them like these like hot dog looking things. They're cat. It's actually I mean, from what I was reading, every part of cattail is actually edible. But I've only tried the tender shoots. So if you come in the spring and find their new shoots that they're growing up, like the new tender shoots, they're really easy to like pull out of the ground, or you can cut them at the base, peel off the outside layers until you have this nice, tender white stalk, and then chop off the tops of it. And then you have these great things. They taste like cucumber a little bit when you eat them raw, but you can also cook them and saute them and things like that. And it's definitely like very, very delicious. And then the last thing, mushrooms. So oyster mushrooms are about the only mushrooms in March that are going to be out. And these are pretty easy to identify. They grow on dead and dying trees. Mainly, the giveaways, they have gills. They have these really defined gills underneath them. It's pretty easy, like to find, to identify these guys compared to other ones. But definitely want to make sure that take a picture, post it, you can harvest it, but then take a picture and post it on Facebook just to get confirmation before, if that's your first time identifying oyster mushrooms. But you definitely want to cut these guys at base with a knife. You don't just want to rip them out, because that way they can regrow. They'll keep on regrowing better if you use a knife to cut them off. All right, so that's March. And then April, we got a lot of really delicious flowers going on in April. So about the same edible garden weeds. And then if you look, I highlight the new stuff that are emerging in blue on the side. And some of the new things like wild violets. So these are like, they look like, normal garden store violets, but you just find them growing. Like Rock Creek Park has a lot of them, and then they're really great. You can mix them in salads. You can bake them. They give that a little bit of that sweet floral taste to like things. But a lot of them, I wouldn't, like I said, I wouldn't have a whole salad of violets, but I would mix that with like some other greens and stuff. And it's really good. Red buds. So this is a fantastic tree that's all over DC. It's really beautiful. It's always usually blossoming around Easter. I usually make like a red bud salad every Easter. It's basically the blossoms. The blossoms are completely edible. They're really sweet. They have this like sweet floral taste to them. You can just pull them off and eat them raw, or you pull them off and mix them into like a salad or things like that. A lot of people will actually bake with them too. Like they'll bake them. I've had like red bud cakes and things like that. They'll add a little bit of moisture and then a little bit of that floral sweetness to it. It's really good. Garlic mustard is another really great plant. That's it's not. I wouldn't say it's a great plant because it's actually an invasive plant. This is one of those things that you want to harvest as much as possible. Garlic mustard. You can pull, yeah, try to pull them out completely by the roots, you know, if possible. There's especially, you'll see a lot of these, like even right when you're just walking into Rock Creek, and there's usually a bunch of these right at the entrances. They're you can eat like the leaves and things like that, and then you can. A lot of people will cook them down, and they'll, you know, it's got like a bit of a, it's like a mild garlicky, you know. Some people, you know, say like a bitter crest kind of taste to it, but um, then linden, like linden trees. So these are really beautiful tall trees throughout the city. They're also called basswood trees. There's actually like most of the, you know, almost all of the tree you can actually eat. You know, people use the bark for medicinal purposes. They use like flowers. They can eat the flowers. The sap, you can do medicinal syrups out of the sap, but I've only actually done the actual leaves, and right in April, the leaves are going to start merging, and you can either grab some of these leaves, you know, as their little leaf buds when they're starting to come out, and these are really delicious as well. Or you can, you know, wait till they get these baby leaves, like no more than like maybe 2 inches thick, and then you can pop them out. And the really easy way you can tell linden, their leaves, they're serrated. They mean they got spiky edges, and they literally look like a little spade. Um, but it's a, yeah, it's a really beautiful tree. Again, you don't want to like take all their leaves. You just want to, like, you know, maybe harvest, you know, enough for you know, that week or something like that. But a lot of times, I mean, lindens can get kind of big, so you're not going to be able to get, you know, to the most of the leaves anyways. Um, Ramps. So ramps. So there's a whole bunch of like wild onions. There's like a whole classification, and there's like tons of different types of wild onions, all over. And we'll talk a little bit more like wild garlic and wild, you know, field garlic and things like that are part of the same family. So they're basically like, if you've ever like, yeah, I mean, like, yeah. Oh, so yeah, let me start over. So they're so a lot of people probably, I mean, people consider ramps to be kind of more of the more delicious, you know, kind of wild onions. But we'll talk about different types of wild onions throughout this presentation, and wild garlic. But these are really easy to identify because most of the times, they look like chives. They have these. If you ever seen chives, they're just these, just like these round, straight leaves pulling up. But these ramps actually have more wider and thicker kind of leaves as well. So that's kind of how you tell the ramps. And the idea with ramps is we are over harvesting ramps in many places, and we're really, like, you know, pushing them, you know, that plant to distinction in several different areas. So we really want to be careful when we're harvesting ramps. We want to harvest them sustainably, which is basically, you don't want to pull out the root systems. You want to leave the roots, and you just want to take just a couple leaves per cluster, and you want to leave the rest and kind of let it rebound and regrow. And then let's see what yeah. Oh, maple seeds. So maple seeds is another one. Right now, we're probably a lot of our maple trees right now are dropping a lot of their seeds. They come in these little like wing seed thing, you know, pods. And yeah, and ideas you want to look for them when they're green, and when they're still green and new. So you want to wait till they fall on the ground, but grab them. And you can just pop out the little seeds, and you can roast the seeds, or you can boil them. I've never actually, you know, tried this, but I know a lot of people that have, and they seem to really like the taste of it. And I think that's it for the, oh yeah. And then the last thing, we have a new mushroom in April that's starting to emerge, and it's still around. If you can still find this mushroom. These are called morels. Really cool looking mushrooms. They come in different colors, but mainly the ones I've seen in this area are all basically just brown. And these, you'll see them, they come out of the ground. A lot of times, I mean, they come from rotting wood, but mainly from like root systems and wood in the ground that kind of pops up. A really, really, you know, a really delicious mushroom. There is like a look. They say it's a lookalike, but it's called a false morel. But it looks like, yeah, it just looks like it's this nastiness on top of its stem. It would be hard to again to misidentify that, but that is something to think about. Yeah, definitely check out. You know, make sure you're familiar with what a false morel looks like. as you're hunting for morels. But these are still around, and they stick around all year, but they mainly come out in the heavy, after a heavy rain in the spring, and then they may pop up occasionally throughout the summer if it rains really hard. But it's mainly the spring that you're really going to find these mushrooms. All right, and then I wanted to I wanted to add what I consider kind of foraging from your garden as well. So we're going to talk about, throughout this presentation, talk about different parts of plants that that we normally throw away in our garden, which I consider kind of like food recovery, kind of a more of a human foraging as well. Hopefully that makes it makes sense. But if not, here's I'll just I'll go through this slide real quick. But yeah, at the same time, we have right now we're in April, April, May, usually March, April, May, we do a lot of cool weather crops, like your greens and broccolis and things like that. And then around May to June, we transfer over and we start planting warm weather crops like your tomatoes, your eggplants, your peppers, and things like that. So right now, we're probably, hopefully, a lot of people are starting to harvest. If they did a spring garden, they're starting to harvest a lot of things. And we're going to talk about different parts of crops that actually are really delicious and that are normally thrown away. Like, for example, broccoli stalks. Like, actually, every part of a broccoli plant is edible. Like the leaves are super delicious. They're like a spinachy collard kind of thing. And then the stalks. So normally, like, you get one big broccoli head on the top, you cut that off, and then you might get a second or third one on the sides. But then when we're done, people usually throw it away. But I would harvest this whole plant. Like the stalks themselves, you can, if you want to eat them raw, you can just, kind of peel off the outside layer, and this is really tender, kind of water chestnut kind of a flavor to it. Or you can cook it down or pickle it or things like that. Like chard stalks. So normally we just rip off the leaves to the chard, and then we're left with the stalks that we throw away. But you can actually, if you boil them and puree them, you can use them in a lot of different recipes. Like we have a class where we make chard stalk hummus. So if you actually replace chickpeas with the chard stalks and then blend it up with some tahini and other things, it's like the most amazing hummus that I've ever had. It's so creamy. It's so good. Um, a lot of pea shoots. So pea shoots are just like stalks and leaves. So pea plants that have this like nutty pea taste to it. It tastes very similar to the actual pods, but a lot of people will throughout as the peas are growing, they'll actually prune their peas a little bit, where they'll just like start cutting off the top like 2 to 4 inches of each new branch, and that will actually help it make it more of a bushier plant. But then also you can take those and you can eat them raw, put them in salads. You can cook them, things like that. They're just really delicious. Part of a pea plant that not a lot of people usually eat. Like Brussels sprouts, the leaves are actually collards. So as you're like harvesting the Brussels sprouts, you can start pulling out the collards and cooking them just like collards. Cauliflower leaves, roasting those are super delicious. And a lot of our root tops, like beets, beet greens are basically spinach. Carrot greens are very parsley-like. Same with parsnips. Radish greens are this like really spicy, peppery flavor to them. A lot of times they got prickly parts of it, so you have to cook them down. But it's really, really delicious. Right, and then there's some blossoms and seeds in our gardens right now that are really great to try out. One of them, like so a lot of times when we're growing like brassicas like kale and arugula and stuff, when it gets too warm, they kind of freak out, and then the whole plant gets bitter, and it bolts. It tries to go to flower, so it gets shoot out as seeds. And when it does that, normally people just, it's time to throw your plant out. But if you wait and let it actually, bolt and then cut off that top, you can actually saute that. It's like a broccoli rabe. It's so delicious. And you can saute it with like butter and garlic and things like that. It's super delicious. And same like cilantro. So cilantro is this really great cool weather, herb that once it starts to warm up, it just starts to bolt and then it will die. But if you let it, don't rip it out. If you let it just kind of dry out a little bit, wait till the seeds actually, these are the seeds left over from the blossoms and stuff. You let it just like dry out and then cut it off and put it in a paper bag and shake it once a day for a week, let the seeds fall out. And then those seeds are what we call coriander. So that's a coriander spice. It's basically cilantro seeds. And you can do the same with mustard seeds, and you can even grind them up, ferment them, and things like that to actually make mustard. And then there's a lot of like great flowers that you can, like borage is this beautiful blue flower. You can pull off the petals, and this is very sweet, tasting flower that I love just to eat raw. Same with like pansies and violets and things. You can either put in salads or bake with them and things like that. All right, so going back to now we've hit May, so now things are starting to warm up a little bit. So we're going to start seeing things change. We're going to start seeing things like our old herbs that we've been eating are going to get more bitter and nasty. But that also means new herbs that can't tolerate the winter are starting to emerge and things like that. So May, again, like things like chickweed and dandelions at this point, I mean, they're probably still good, but they're starting to get more and more bitter as things start to warm up, especially as they start flower. Like especially chickweed after they flowers is not that great afterwards. But dandelion, yeah, you can still harvest dandelion all year long. It's going to get more bitter and it needs to be cooked down more. I wouldn't eat it raw at this point. And then we start seeing some new herbs, or new edible garden weeds emerge. One of the biggest ones, lamb's quarter. So this is a fantastic plant. It's so nutritious. It's got way more nutrition than kale or anything like that in your garden, and it just grows like crazy. And it's basically, you treat it just like a wild spinach. So you just, you can pull it, do whatever you want with your spinach, eat it raw, saute it, things like that. So that's lamb's quarter, and then we've got broadleaf plantain. This is not related to the actual plantain fruit. It's a different like weed. It's just a weed. It doesn't have fruit. And people do eat these. It is edible, but I don't know if it tastes good or not. I just never hear that, and I've never actually tried it. But what a lot of people use it for is a lot of medicinal purposes. It's an antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, so people can make a lot of great tinctures and things like that out of it. But what I use it for, I swear this works. If I get a mosquito bite, I'll actually do what it's called a spit poultice. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but you chew up some leaf. Don't swallow it, just chew it in your mouth and then spit out, like the chewed, clump, and then put it over your mosquito bite. I swear, in like 10 seconds, that itch goes away. It actually like kind of breaks down like what I don't understand the science honestly, but I just know the itch goes away. It's really really cool. Um, and some of the new plants are going to be out are mainly field garlic. So this is in the same family as like ramps. It's the same family as the allium family. And it's the same as like wild, leeks and wild onions and things like that. But field garlic. So this is something like I mean, you could find fields of this stuff if you know where to look at. There's a lot of it in the forests in DC. A lot of times it will start growing in people's yards and people treat it as a weed. They'll spray it and things like that. But I've only ever seen it in like Rock Creek and places like that. And or I know friends. I have some friends that they talk about like having these giant fields that they know of field garlic. But it's basically, so this, if you know what a chive looks like, it basically looks like a chive on the top. Looks like these cylinder, top leaves. It will bloom kind of somewhat similar, I mean, to the chive, not so much, but it's got like an allium looking bloom. A lot of times you don't ever see them because it'll get cut down by a lawnmower or whatever before it blooms. But if you see this, you can actually pull them out, and a lot of times there'll be little bulbs at the end, and that taste very similar. It's like a mild kind of garlic, oniony, garlicky kind of allium taste to it. And the whole part, you can eat the whole part. You can chop it up like chives, or you can do whatever with the bulbs. But yeah. And then June is like is when I get really excited because we're starting to hit berry season in June. So we're exploding with berries in June. Sometimes it's early July, but yeah, I think you could start looking for a lot of these things in June. So we'll talk real quick. There's a new herb or a new weed, a garden weed that's emerging before we get into berries. It's called purslane. So purslane is something you want to know. Purslane is a fantastic weed. It's a succulent. You can eat like the leaves. They have that, succulent kind of like, aloe. I mean, it's not like an aloe plant, but it's just like the texture is. Or you can cook it down, mix it in salads, things like that. But if you're looking for like omega-3 fatty acids, this plant has more omega-3 fatty acids than than any plant that I know of. It's just full of like all. It's super healthy plant for you. So definitely when you see that, you'll start seeing it around June, July, kind of merging in your garden. You can either, yeah, I definitely recommend, letting it be and just harvesting from it. But now now we're gonna talk my favorite. There's three berries in this area that start appearing in June. So service berries and mulberries almost definitely appear sometime in June, and then wine berries. We'll talk about wine berries in a second. Wine berries, though, it seems like it's either end of June or it might be July. But I put them in June just to start keeping an eye out. You'll definitely see that the berries start forming in June, but a lot of times you want to wait. So this is wineberry up here. You want to wait till they get purple, dark red or purple. That's when they get really sweet. And then at that point, that's usually either end of June or early July. But so wineberry isn't invasive, so if you want to just have at it. You want to harvest as much as possible. The more we eat, the less birds are going to eat them and poop them out everywhere and spread them around. So they're basically, I mean, they're like a wild raspberry. The leaves look very similar to raspberry leaves. They're very defined leaves, and then they got the stalks are kind of spiky red stalks that yeah don't feel very comfortable when you grab them. But and then they'll have patches, and then you'll see like, I mean, yeah, any trail, like a lot of trails in Rock Creek, a lot of like, a lot of times just driving on the side of the road, like a lot of entrances to Rock Creek, they'll just be, they're just plenty. I mean, there'll be just, thousands of wineberries just forming. Really, really delicious plant. And then we have service berries. So this is my all-time favorite. So service berries are essentially giant blueberry trees. Um, which is pretty great. I mean, and that no one knows about. I mean, so these are service berries. They're like a little bit watered down blueberries. They're really, really good. You wait till they get purple. They start off like, red, and then darker red, and then purplish blue. And that's when purplish blue is when they get their sweetest. And they are so plentiful. And they're everywhere in DC. There's so many street trees like them. There are service berries. Some of my favorite places are where I work. It's on First Street. I think it's First Street Northeast. It's just north of the Union Station. There's a bunch of service berries, and they're in these like planter boxes, these above ground planter boxes. And I guess it's got like the best soil ever. And they're just so plentiful. Like you can go out there in buckets and literally like just fill up buckets of service berries in the spring or in June. And they're great. I mean, I eat them raw. I'll throw them in cereal. You can bake them in muffins and things like that. They're really good. And then like you'll see a lot of them in Tacoma, Maryland. Like whoever the arborist is in Tacoma, Maryland, loves service berries because like especially in that downtown area where like the Ace Hardware store is and stuff. Like all the street trees in that whole street are service berries, and they're just so plentiful. And then mulberries. Mulberries are really, really fantastic. Berries. They look like kind of like raspberries, but they're a lot sweeter. They're not very tart. It's really important. So there's two different types of mulberries in this area. There's a native mulberry and an invasive. And the native one is called it's a red mulberry, and that has nothing to do with the berries. All the berries have the same colors. They start out white, they turn red, and then they turn purple when they're ripe. But there's just it's just a species type, like a red oak or a white oak. So the red mulberry is native. That one is usually one that you have to plant yourself in your backyard. If you want a mulberry in your backyard, you want to plant red. And then the white mulberry is the invasive one. That's the one where you see, like I took a picture. I mean, you just see them all over the city, just growing out, literally cracks in sidewalks and in alleyways and things like that. So. If you see that, I mean, they're still the same berries. They're still delicious. I mean, it's actually a good thing to eat them because, again, the birds won't take them around and spread them. But I do want to give you a piece of advice: wear gloves when you're harvesting mulberries because they are they will stain. You know, because once they're so easy to break, and once you break that juices will stain. You know, your fingers, your clothes, things like that. So you just want to be really careful with mulberries. Oh, and I forgot to, on service berries, they do have this thing called a cedar apple rust, where it's a fungal disease that harbor. If it's a mild winter, they harbor in cedar trees, and then if it's a wet spring, they'll shoot their spores out. And it doesn't kill the tree. It's just doesn't make you just can't you don't want to eat the berries. So whenever you see these orange like they look like dreads coming out of these berries, just avoid. Yeah, but don't eat those for sure. All right, so a question, do you find many of our native raspberries, non-Y berries around the city? Um, I mean, yeah. I mean, I've never really foraged. I mean, I've never actually seen native raspberries in like a Rock Creek Park or anything like that, or in like a forest. I've only seen them when people planted them throughout the area, but yeah, no, I haven't. Doesn't mean that they're not out there, but yeah, I haven't seen anything but wineberries and blackberries that we'll talk about in a second. All right, so there's a berry picking tip. So there are a bunch of pretty toxic berries out there. So you just want to be careful. So there's a couple just general rules of thumb. Well, one, you don't want to eat anything unless you're 100% confident about it. But if you're trying to figure out different things like mainly berries that are white, yellow, or green are all toxic. Don't ever eat anything those colors. And then red, it's like 50-50 whether it's going to be toxic or not. But in general, like blue, black, and what they call aggregate berries, like raspberries and blackberries and mulberries, those typically are pretty safe. There are some exceptions, like pokeweed or pokeberries. It's pretty toxic. Even though, like, I know, like, every time we do a foraging class or a plant walk, there's always somebody in the group that grew up on like poke wine or eating poke leaves. A lot of people do eat a lot of parts of pokeweed, and I think certain parts, like the seeds, are the more toxic part. But if you don't know what you're doing, just stay away from this plant. You really need to know what you're doing if you're going to be harvesting pokeweed. But then there's other ones like Virginia creeper, hollies, bittersweets. If you ever see these like hollow out berries, don't eat those. Dogwoods and things like that. Um, so there is a test, and like I said, like this is I recommend doing this test if you only do this, you don't do this if you're not confident. If you're not confident, you don't eat it. But if you're confident, but you just want, but this is your first time IDing something, there's a berry test that you can do where you squish some berries on your like a berry on your arm, and then just wait 20 minutes to see if your skin has any kind of reaction, and then if not, touch a little bit to your lips, and then wait 20 minutes for so you have reactions. If not, touch a little bit to your tongue or gums, and then if not, chew the berry for like 10 to 15 minutes, and if not, then supposedly at that point it's probably good. But I only say this because yeah, like I said, you still should be pretty confident about that berry. Like, don't use that as a test. Be like, oh, I'm not sure. Let's do the berry test. This is just, this is good for like a first time. Just if you feel confident, but you just want to, double check, try out the berry test. Cool. I found a blackberry vine in Rock Creek in flower a few days ago. Made me happy to see. Cool. Yeah, we'll talk about blackberries for sure. Yeah, in a second. Yeah. There's a lot of wild blackberries. Unfortunately, a lot of them are invasive, but they're still pretty delicious. And even if they're invasive, that just means we need to, get to them before the birds. All right, so then now that we're starting to do warm weather stuff, we're going to just talk about some warm weather crops that people eat throughout in their garden. So we're going to go back to the garden for a second. So like certain things like marigolds and chive blossoms, the tops you can actually like fry as fritters. You can saute them and things. This is really good. Garlic scapes. Garlic has a really weird season where garlic. You plant it in the October and then over winters, and then it's it does well in the spring, and then you harvest it at the end of June or early July when like the bottom half starts getting brown. But in late May, it will start to it will want to flower. So it sends out this garlic scape, it's in the garlic scape. You're at a garlic scape. It's this like very tender, a mild garlicky taste to it. Like you can chop it up, put it in salads or saute it, use it as a cooking spice. But you can't wait too long. If you wait too long, it likes to do these loops, and if you wait too long, it gets woody, and then eventually it'll blossom. You definitely want to get to it before the flower opens up, because that's going to take nutrients from your garlic. So I usually wait till it does one loop, and then I'll cut it or pull it at the base, and then it's still pretty tender at that point. Then I think I had the nasturtiums. Nasturtiums, I think we're actually going to talk about, and then another slide, or I thought maybe it was another slide, but nasturtiums, if you grow nasturtiums, I don't have a flower of it, but those, you can eat the leaves and flowers and stuff is really, really good. Like rose petals, a lot of people do, like a lot of fancy places do a lot of like baking, desserts and stuff. Squash blossoms. So squash is, it's got a tough pollination cycle. It has male and female flowers. If you're growing, this is like if you're growing like yellow squash or like zucchini or things like that, where they have male flowers and female flowers. And you can tell the female, but it'll have a big ovary kind of on the bottom. A lot of times, like the male flowers will open up and then they'll close, and then the female flowers will open up and then close, and then you get no pollination. So that's why a lot of people will plant more than one squash plant to kind of ensure they have better pollination. Or a lot of people will hand pollinate, which is basically you wait till most of your, if not all of your female flowers are opening up, and then you cut off a male flower, pull off the petals, and then kind of dip it into every female flower, and then you'll have like 100% great pollination rate at that point. And then you're left with a bunch of male flowers that are going to have fruit. So then that's a good, and then you can go ahead and cut those off. I love to like stuff them with ricotta cheese and bake them with honey on top, or like make fritters, tacos, things like that out of them. It's really, really delicious. So I have a question. Back to mushrooms for a second. Are there others in May and June? There are some in my garden that look like regular white cap mushrooms. Any advice on how to know if mushrooms are okay to consume? Yeah, there probably are other ones. I'm just talking about the ones that don't really have like lookalikes, that are pretty easy to identify. So like white caps and stuff like that. I don't know. I mean, I would definitely check out that mushroom foraging class. They'll dive deep into that. They'll let you know exactly what's around. I mean, there's definitely more mushrooms out right now to eat. I just don't know a whole lot about them. I'm just kind of sticking with the easy ones where you can't really mistake them from other ones. But yeah, I'm almost positive there's other things to eat at this point. And then it's different leaves there, and other parts of the garden, like sweet potato leaves. So there's actually every part of the sweet potato leaf is edible, and it's you cook it. It's like spinach. You can cook it down. The stalks are edible. I mean, you don't want to harvest too much because you want to still grow sweet potatoes. But after you harvest those sweet potatoes, you can harvest all of it and yeah, cook it down, saute it, things like that. Nasturtium seeds. So this is what a nasturtium looks like. And then when the seeds, if you let it blossom and then let it, kind of the blossoms die, and you don't deadhead it, you actually leave it on, it'll turn into a seed, and people will actually pull them off and they'll pickle them. It's called the poor man's capers. When you pickle nasturtiums, it tastes just like capers. It's really good. And then like watermelon rinds and things like that. You can pickle these things. And then any last scraps and things like that, you can actually make it, stick them in your freezer, pull them out, make broths and stuff like that out of them. So mainly, just like the whole point of this is that there's no, there's not a lot of parts in your garden that you have to waste. There's so many different things that you can do. But anyway, all right. So let's get back to foraging. So now we're entering July. So there's a couple more really great plants that are emerging in July that you want to keep an eye out for. I wrote figs, even though figs isn't really like one, it's not native to this area. They don't grow on their own. They have to be planted. But there are so many fig trees that are in like public parks and like schools and things like that, it's a good thing to know. That yeah, there are definitely a lot of fig trees in DC that are up for grabs for foraging. So definitely, yeah, keep an eye out for figs. And figs, they have these like really distinctive leaves. Um, they can grow like they can grow big, 20 feet tall, 20 feet wide, but a lot of our figs don't because our winters will kill. They're really not made for these harsh DC winters. So a lot of times the tops will die, but the roots will survive, and then they'll come back. Every time they come back, they'll come back bushier with more branches, and so it's more of a shrub than a tree after it dies once. And but the hardest part is like is getting the figs just right. So you want to wait. Mainly like the best part, you want to get them when they're almost like mushy, but mainly when they start hanging, like drooping. So a lot of times figs come out and they're like almost like horizontally out, kind of poking upward. But once they get kind of tender and ripe, they'll start drooping downward, and that's when you want to start harvesting them. But it's always a good idea to harvest one and eat it, try it before you harvest harvest all, because I definitely harvest the whole tree and then realized most of them were not quite ripe, and it's really hard to ripen them after you pull them. Um, so then there's a blackberry that's all over DC, all over our wooded areas. It's an invasive blackberry. It's called the Himalayan blackberry. There are native blackberries to this area, and I'm sure there probably are some in our parks. I've never really found. All the ones I found were either Himalayan, or I just wasn't like I didn't know that they were native at the time. But the Himalayans, I mean, you could tell because I mean they take over. I mean they just spread like crazy. When I first started gardening, I would like check listservs for free plants, and everyone was always like, "Oh, I got a free blackberry plant," and I would plant it, and I did not know it was a Himalayan, and it would just like take over. It just sends runners and just like so many shoots and stuff. So definitely, yeah. If you're getting free blackberry plants, make sure it's in the native, not invasive. They do have thorns, but they taste just like regular blackberries. They're super delicious, and you just wait till they're full and black and when they're ripe. And then maypop. So there is a passion flower. So there's a lot of different passion fruits out there. Most of them are they need more warmer climates. A lot of them are tropical, but there is a native passion flower vine, and it's mainly native in the south. But I have seen it up north. A lot of times, I was planted in parks and things like that. But I did put this here because a lot of times people will plant them, and then they passion flower spreads like crazy. It's not invasive, but it definitely is it sends runners out, and it will take over an area really quickly. It's a great plant. I mean, if you wanted to take over something like a fence or something like that, it's a great plant for that. But it will spread like crazy, and it will keep on spreading. So yeah, it's definitely, yeah, it's very delicious. You have to kind of pull the open, and it's hard to describe. It's really delicious, like kind of fruity. Almost like snot balls, for lack of words. Inside the fruit, it looks kind of disgusting, but it's super delicious. So definitely keep an eye out. There are a couple that are in parks, but I've never really seen it. I don't see it growing in wild areas like Rock Creek or Park. I think you have to go more south to find that. But there are some in DC though. And then the next mushroom I'm going to talk about that's easy to identify is chanterelles. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And these are they look they're very similar, somewhat have similar features with the oyster mushrooms because they have not so much defined gills. I get they're more like forked ridges gills, but that kind of flatten out over time. But they are pretty. I mean, they're pretty pretty easy to see. They're very orange. They grow on the forest floor. These, I mean, you won't ever find them growing out of trees. Where the mushrooms I'm going to talk about, most of them grow off of trees or dead, trees. There's only one that look alike that I don't think looks like it, but it's called the jack-o'-lantern. and there's not too much. I mean, besides the color, they're pretty different. They're pretty, looking. So, but definitely it's something like, if you're gonna go out foraging for mushrooms, you should know what a jack-o'-lantern looks like, because I've seen this. This is all over Rock Creek, and but yeah, chanterelle is really delicious. It's got a sweet smell to it. It's really good. So then another way, if you're not quite sure how to identify mushrooms, there's another thing that you can do to kind of help identify. It's not like the only thing you want to do, but something that can help confirm that something is something or isn't something, and that's called mushroom spore prints. And it's actually really, really cool to do, and it's a beautiful. I mean, it's like artwork. But you basically just get, you cut off the top part of your mushroom. So most mushrooms, if they have gills, the spores come out of the gills. So if they have these kind of gill areas, that's where the spores come out of. Or if they don't have gills, they'll have pores that kind of like that the spores will come out as well. And spores are basically mushroom seeds that they shoot out in the air, and they'll land on rotting wood and things like that, and they'll start growing new mushrooms. So if you cut that, let's cut the stalk off and just lay it, a mushroom down on a piece of paper. You could put like some people will put like a glass jar or something over it just to keep it, from any wind blowing it around or anything like that. And you wait about 6 or 8 hours, like usually overnight, and then you check it in the morning, you lift the mushroom off, and you have the most beautiful pattern. Because all the spores, especially if you harvest them, all the spores will fall out. But they'll fall out perfectly tracing the either the gills or if it's not gills, the spores. So this is a chanterelle mushroom print. This is it's called a Baleatus impilatus mushroom that has spores that fall out. It's really beautiful. It's a really cool activity to do. And it's just one more thing. Like if you're not sure, like I'm not sure if this is a Chantel. You could do this, and then you can compare it to other Chantels. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. Chantels spore prints, and this is a great way because they have very unique spore. It's like fingerprints. They have very unique. The species have like very similar, prints, and then other species have very different prints. So this is another way where you're not quite sure. You could do a mushroom print, and that will help you kind of confirm if it is something or not. And you can also use that. Then we have another class we're going to talk about actually growing mushrooms in your own house using like sawdust bags or logs or things like that. And you have to get this inoculant. You have to get the spores, and then you inoculate the wood with the spores. And you can actually use these spores to inoculate and start growing your own mushrooms at home as well. It's like seed saving for mushrooms. All right, so August, there's a couple more plants popping up that should keep an eye out for. One of them is the dogwoods, the Kuza dogwoods. So dogwoods are really beautiful ornamental plants. That's it. It's usually like 10 feet or so, especially in urban soils. It never gets that tall. It has these very unique flowers. They all, start out. The tips are all attached to the center in like a bow. It looks like a ribbon and bow, and then they release and they open up. It's really easy to kind of tell. There's no other flower that looks anything like that, dogwood. But there's a certain species of dogwood. It's called Kuza. And Kuza, they actually produce. This is the only one. All the other dogwoods you don't want to, mess with. And this is different. This is not the berries. If you remember, like the dogwood berries are actually very toxic. But then after it flowers, it will start producing these fruits in the summer. They're really small fruits. I mean, they're the size of maybe a dime, but they're really plentiful. They'll produce like hundreds of them per trees. And you really need to like kind of wait. Till they get ripe. It can become a little astringent until they're ripe. And it's got like kind of a fruity, custardy kind of taste to it. You don't really want to eat the outside the skin though. So and when you do harvest them, you kind of want to break open the skins and about the pulp, and then use that pulp. I mean, they're really great in smoothies. Eat it fresh. Things like that. So. And then wild blueberries, which I have to say, I have not found any wild blueberries in DC, but I wanted to put that on there just because it's such an amazing experience if you've never gone wild blueberry foraging. You do need to kind of go, a little bit, you need to have a car, you need to get it out a little bit, particularly to like mountains. Where I used to do wild blueberry foraging is the Blue Ridge Highway, which is a highway that goes through like Virginia. Through, it just goes through the mountains, Appalachian Mountains in Virginia, North Carolina, and basically there's just all along that highway. If you stop, there's trails, and if you walk those trails in August, you're just going to see these wild blueberries. So they're like they're called low bush. So the blueberries that you buy from the store, those are high bush. And some of them can get like 5-6 feet tall if they're in the right conditions, but most of them probably get like 3 to 4 feet if that. And they're plentiful. But wild blueberries are low bush, meaning that they're not going to get more than like a foot tall, and they're going to shoot runners and start spreading runners all around. And you look for like these like rocky areas because kind of rocky, fields, sometimes up in the mountains, sometimes like base of mountains and things like that. And it's just, yeah, when you find them, I mean, it's just so plentiful. I mean, they'll just be like a field of just like hundreds of these blueberry plants, and you can just fill up buckets of these wild blueberries. They taste just the same. They are smaller though. So it does, it takes a lot more work, collecting wild blueberries. Oh, so just as Matt's Habitats has an awesome local blueberry foraging class this year, right on the north side of the Beltway. And, oh man, I would love to take that class. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely check out Matt's Habitats. I've never actually taken his walks. I need to, but I've heard nothing but amazing things. And yeah, it would be worth it just to find a wild blueberry patch. Because I mean, some of these things, like I said, it could be whole fields of just wild, because they spread on their own through runners, like how strawberries spread. They send runner like roots that grow horizontal, and then start producing other plants. And it just, I mean, if you find a good spot, I mean, it could feed so many people. Um, and then a couple edible mushrooms. So again, easy mushrooms to identify. Take the mushroom class if you want to identify more. I just kind of stick with the ones that I know that just like there's no uncertainty there. And one of them, like really, is one, chicken in the woods. There's nothing that really looks like chicken in the woods. This grows on trees, and sometimes you'll find it on the ground. That's basically because there's some buried wood in the ground, or a root section. I mean, it needs wood to grow. A lot of times it will grow in like dead wood, and it's like it's different kinds. It can be parasitic as well, or it can just it helps decompose a lot of wood. And it's super delicious. I mean, you use a knife to kind of like cut it off, because don't want to just yank it off. Again, you want to be gentle, and that way it will regrow. A lot of these spots will, especially if we get a couple rains in a row, will regrow the mushrooms a couple times throughout the summer, or throughout the year. And it tastes just like, I mean, depending on how you cook it, you can either taste like a chicken, or it tastes like a lobstery crab kind of seafood. So like if you do if you saute it, I think it tastes a lot like chicken. And when they like making like chicken Alfredo and things like that with chicken in the woods is so good. And the other real easy one, back to chicken in the woods. The only thing you want to be careful of is learn what conifers and cedar trees are. So these are like your evergreen ones, usually the ones that stay green throughout the year. If you see chicken in the woods growing from those trees, sometimes it can be too harsh for a lot of people's stomachs, so you want to avoid those. And a lot of people, I've read about this. A lot of my friends have eaten chicken in the woods and have no problems. But I have read that some people's stomachs don't really particularly like chicken in the woods. So if it's your first time eating chicken in the woods, well, it's first time eating anything, just eat a little bit at once, and then wait a day to see how it goes, and then before you start diving into it. And lion's mane is another really easy one. You see it growing off of trees. I've never actually seen it anywhere close to the ground. It's always been growing off of trees. And it's like a seafood kind of like a taste to it. It's really delicious. All right. then September. So now there's a couple more things, ripening up. But as So one is American persimmons or native persimmons. So there are a bunch of native persimmons in DC. I don't know if if they were planted or what, but these are really great. I'll tell you about the one I know of that I go to just because it's so plentiful and it's like. But there are some outside the Tacoma Rec Center, by the Tacoma Aquatic Center. And if you walk around there, you'll find a couple native persimmons. And the thing about native persimmons is they get really tall. They get I mean, it can get up to like 60, 80 feet, but I mean, most of the time they'll get at least like 20 or 30 feet with bad soil. That's why when you're buying, usually if you're buying persimmon trees, I would definitely recommend the Asian persimmons because they're nice, shorter, and they're easy to harvest. But these get really tall. And but the thing about persimmons, native persimmons, a lot of times though it doesn't really matter because a lot of times I wait for them to fall on the ground before I eat them because because they're very astringent if you eat them too early. Where I don't know if anyone's ever done that horrible thing challenge in high school. Don't ever do it if you haven't done it. It's called the cinnamon challenge, where you like try to someone dares you to eat a spoonful of cinnamon, and it's literally impossible. It's so astringent, it just sucks all the moisture out of your mouth. But that's very similar to like how it's just like sucks that moisture and it just like puckers your whole mouth. So that's why I mean it's good to like if you wait till they fall on the ground, they're good to go. Or pick them out, maybe take a little bite if it's astringent. Bring them home, put them in a paper bag, and let them ripen on their own for a couple days before you start eating them. Black walnuts. So walnut trees, huge trees, can be like, around 100 feet tall at least. It's all walnut trees, but black walnuts, they have these like really hard green, outer coating. You got to wait till they fall down in the fall. And once they fall, you still have to crack them open. I mean, I know a lot of people, they'll put them in a driveway and run them over with a car because they're so hard to like crack open. So do that. And then you have these, the next layer of nut, and the black layer, you want to actually use gloves because this will, like whatever that material is, will like stain, that pulpy stuff will stain things. So wear gloves, and you want to dry them out in the, for a couple days in the sun, and then dry them out for a couple weeks in your basement. And then take a hammer and crack them open and get the final actual walnut. And it's not it's not exactly like the kind of walnut that you would find in the store. It's a little bit more floral. Sometimes I mean you'll get some really bitter ones depending on like what happened at the time, but it's still pretty good. Ginkgo tree. So if anyone lives by a ginkgo tree, you probably hate the ginkgo fruit because they stink. That's one reason why if you see like a yellow dot or one of those dots, I can't remember the color. If you see some kind of spray paint dot on a ginkgo tree, that means that it's been marked to be sprayed because they'll spray them, the urban forestry, to keep them from actually producing fruit just because it stinks up the whole area. Then you step on them and get them in your shoes and you bring them into your house and that's awful. But one silver lining is you can actually eat these stinky fruits. They're not, they're actually really delicious, but you just gotta get all the stink off. You can harvest them. You want to harvest them while they're still on the tree, or if they fall on the ground, just harvest them on the ground. Just check them, make sure they're not like decomposing or there's holes or stuff. So they you bring them. They have these hard shell, or you bring them, you soak them in a bucket of water, and then you kind of pull them apart after you soak them for a little while. You pull them apart, all the pulpy stuff out, rinse them really well, like rinse them until you don't smell anything. You have to rinse them a couple times, and then like you can boil them for a little while, and then you crack them open, and you have the nuts, tender green nuts. So it's a process, but it's definitely, it's really good once you get to the end point. It just takes a little while, kind of like walnuts. And then the last thing, pawpaws. So pawpaws are actually like one of the largest fruits. I believe the largest fruit in North America. it's not to get confused with it. There's people call a certain kind of fruit pawpaw in Africa. That's a whole different species altogether. So these are native, particularly to this area, the eastern shore or eastern side of the country. You can find them growing like crazy, particularly along like rivers and things like that. Like I'll see, there's a lot of them out in the Billy Goat trails. If you go off their hiking trails along Potomac, if you go, you take the C&O Canal bike trail to Great Falls, or just drive out to Great Falls and walk a little bit south. You'll see a lot of them. A lot of times, though, you'll see a lot of them, and there won't be any fruit. That's because they shoot runners like strawberries, and they need cross pollination to actually produce fruit. So you'll see 20 of them all in this little area, but there won't be any fruit because it's all the same pawpaw. So you actually have to have two with cross pollination. Have to have two different types, of pawpaws to actually pollinate themselves. So that's why a lot of times you don't see them in the market. They are making a more of appearance at farmers markets. Like I know at Tacoma Farmers Market, and I think DuPont has a pawpaw person. Um, but it's problem. There's a couple problems with it. One is like the fruits don't store very well. You have to eat them pretty quickly once they're ripe. And the pollination is really hard. They have these really beautiful but weird red flowers where bees don't like them. They actually are pollinated by nature by like carrion insects like spiders and things like that. So it's like terrible pollination. You can actually hand pollinate them though. Like if you want to grow pawpaws in your backyard, order two different types, and you can actually hand pollinate with a paintbrush. You can get all the pollen from one tree, scrape it into a little cup, and then paintbrush it into all the flowers on the other tree, and vice versa. And you'll have really great pollination after that. But the fruits are really delicious. They're this like mixture between this like mango-y, banana, custardy kind of fruit. You don't eat the skin, and they've got these big, seeds that you just pluck out, but then rest you can just scoop out. Like pawpaw pie, like a pumpkin pie, but made with pawpaws is really good. Desserts and things like that. The one I will give you a caution: you want to wait till they're mushy. They're really ripe. Never eat like a uncooked pawpaw. We used to throw these like foraging parties a long time ago, where we'd forage a bunch of food, and then people would come over and cook different recipes and stuff. And we did it with pawpaws one year, and we had a couple unripe pawpaws, and someone made like a green pawpaw shish kebab on the grill, and it got like half our party sick. So it was like, we did. It was our last foraging party for sure. I mean, it won't kill you, but it'll make it'll make your stomach sick. So you have to wait till they're ripe. When they're soft, if you wait till they fall on the ground, they're great, or just wait until they're soft. If they're not quite soft, you put them in the paper bag, and then a couple days they'll get soft. But really, really delicious. So the question here, any walnuts I've tried to husk have ended up rotten. Anyone know what I was doing wrong? Well, sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I mean, there might actually be like worms and things in there that could it could be rotted before you've done it. But I don't know. I don't know for sure. I don't know if anyone's that has any experience with walnuts and rotting. Um, So yeah, sorry, I don't know too much about walnuts, but I'll definitely try. I'll research that a little bit after class and then see. But yeah, I mean, feel free if you want to email me. I can ask around. I do have people that do know more about like walnuts and things like that. Cool. All right, moving on. So October. So there's a couple more things in October that definitely keep an eye out for. If you're growing roses, rose hips is a really good reason why you shouldn't deadhead your roses. So usually, like people deadhead, like when things bloom, and then the flower's done blooming, and it just starts to slowly rot on the branch, and then so a lot of people will deadhead them where you cut them off, and then that stimulates more blooms and you get more flowers. But and which is fine to do throughout the year, but usually like towards the end, the last round of flowers or something, I would leave those flowers on. And sometime in the fall, they start maturing into what's called rose hips, which is basically like rose fruits. And you can they're real good for a lot of times. If you want, a lot of people will wait till after the first frost before they harvest them. But typically you can probably harvest them a little bit before, but you want to wait till they're still like um, that they're yeah that they're still firm and they have a good color to them and stuff. And again, they're kind of like a little custardy kind of sweet taste to them. But a lot of people, you can't eat them raw, but a lot of people will use them for a lot of things, like make jellies out of them and soups. And there's a lot of medicinal purposes, like if you want to make syrups and teas, because they have an enormous amount of vitamin C and antioxidants and things like that. So it's very, very healthy, especially like to make teas, throughout the winter to kind of keep you healthy. Um, so crab apples is another one. So crab apples are basically mini apples, more or less. But they're not as delicious as apples. So you can eat them, fresh if you want. Don't eat the seeds, or like if there's any seeds and stuff, just like apples, crab apples, crab apple trees are really important because all apple trees need, cross pollination, but it's kind of hard because you have to, find certain trees that there's flowers open up at the same time as other trees from another species, and it could be difficult. But a lot of people will plant crab apples because it's a very long blooming season with lots of nectar, so it's very adaptable to a lot of fruit trees, and it's just really beautiful. It's a really beautiful tree. But the thing about the crab apples is, like, if you don't do anything with them, they'll fall, they'll rot, and it will get stinky for a little bit. It's not as bad as ginkgos, but it will get, somewhat stinky. So that's one reason why maybe you want to harvest them. Um, so there's a little trick. You want to kind of like, around October, you want to start, cut one off and kind of cut it in half, and then just make sure you're looking for the seed to be brown. When the seed's brown, that's a good indicator that they're pretty ripe, and then you can harvest, as much as you want. And then, like I said, people don't really eat them fresh. They're not too good fresh, but you can make like jams and jellies and baked goods and things like that out of them. Hawthorns is another really great native tree. You gotta be careful with hawthorn trees because they got pretty massive thorns. So definitely, like, especially when you're like harvesting things from thorn plants, and especially like hawthorns and things that have, they're like, impressive, like, like 1 to 2 inch thorns. You just want to be careful. Like, I would even recommend like wearing goggles, because sometimes you just turn your head the wrong way, and it's just, yeah, oh, it'll just be bad. So, or just be really careful when you're doing it, and slow motions. But anyway, hawthorns, it's one of the last berries I know out there. They have these, they're really good berries, but they're not a whole lot to them. They're mainly seeds, and they're like very similar to apple seeds, where they have that little bit of cyanide, where like it's not going to be like, it won't kill you to eat a couple of them, but you don't want to eat too many of them, because and you wouldn't want to eat a seed anyways. It's not very delicious, but the outside, meaty part of the fruit is really good. So a lot of people eat them fresh. They'll just suck it out and spit out the seed, or they'll make jams and jellies and things like that out of them. And then acorns. So yeah, so acorn is, there's actually a couple organizations in the area that make acorn flour. It's a little bit of a process, but people have been eating acorn flour for a long, long time. And and I believe in many countries, people are still eating. It's still a very, very important part of their food systems. But the problem with just eating, them raw is that they have a lot of tannins, and they really upset your stomach if you don't leach them out. So you have to leach them out. There's a lot of different processes to leach, tannins out from just. A lot of people will crack them open, and they'll grind them, and they'll make the flour, and then they'll put them in jars of water, and then let them sit, and like over a couple of days, and every day they'll change the water because the tannins are slowly rising out. I know certain like Native American tribes would like harvest them and put them in like a net in a river, and just let them. They'll crack them open and just let the river water just like flush out all the tannins over a day, soaking in the river. There's a lot of different ways to leach out tannins, but it does take a couple days usually. process. But ideally, I mean, I would definitely recommend doing white oaks if you're going to do this. You can tell white oaks mainly because they don't have pointy ends on their leaves, and red oaks have pointy ends. Red oaks tend to have a lot more tannins. I mean, they're fine. You can do it. You're just going to have to leach a lot more. And white oaks are tend to, typically tend to be lower with the tannins. So that works out a lot better. But yeah, you flush out all the tannins and then you grind it into like a flour and you can use it to like bake bread and cookies, things like that. I love the taste to it. It's really good. But there's a couple organizations, I don't know if they're still doing, but Forested out in I think Bowie, Maryland. There's this it's like a 10-acre forest garden. They do a lot of permaculture classes and stuff. It's really cool. It's created by Lincoln Smith. They had a acorn processing system for a while. It was a lot of labor. They were working on trying to get equipment from other countries that reduced the labor. That was years ago, but we used to be able to buy like bags of acorn flour from them. It's really cool. All right. So those were all the ones that I kind of like. Those are like I said, it was like more of an intro. These are kind of like easy, fruits and berries and like wild onions and things to harvest. Throughout that I 100% know all of those are in DC. I've seen them, or I know people have seen them. But there's a lot more plants, tons of things to harvest. This is actually, these are pictures from the Northeast Foraging book. Even though it's Northeast, most of these can be found in the Mid-Atlantic. And you could just see, it's broken down by spring, all the different things that you can be trying out, you can be researching for this area. Summer, there's a whole bunch of other ones as well. Then like the fall. And then I actually found this one. This is a great map from Washington State created this map. And if you actually look, even though they're far away, we're in zone 7B, and there, there's actually parts. So zones, USDA created these hardiness zones to kind of, the lower zone, like I believe the more tropical, and the higher zone, the more cold, or might have that backwards, but we're zone 7B, based on our temperatures and our environments and stuff. And if you look at the zone map, there's a lot of Washington State that's actually very similar to that zone. It's particularly east of the mountains. So a lot of these things are pretty, dead on. When I was comparing, different notes are very similar. So this is another great resource to use for things around. And then the last part I want to just talk about is just just talk about different other resources. Here's some really great books. We talked a little bit about edible wild plants and Northeast foraging, but also like there's finding some good plant ID guidebooks. Like the Audubon Society does some really great plant books for Mid-Atlantic. Plant Invaders. This is a really free book. You can download the PDF, and it just talks about all the invasive plants and stuff. And just it's really great. Even if it's not edible, learning these plants will help you figure out identify which ones are edible and not edible by knowing what non-edible ones look like as well. Trying out some of these plant ID apps, like downloading iNaturalist is free, and it's a great way to kind of get second opinions on plants if you don't have friends that you can go with you and help you identify stuff. All these different workshops, Matt's Habitats. We actually do a urban fruit tree and berry class as well. There's a recording on the DAG network, and that's great because there's a lot of fruit trees. Like I know cherry trees and pomegranates and plum trees that are all street trees all over DC that anyone can harvest. So definitely like not just looking at the wild plants, but looking at the street trees and different edibles and stuff around the city, and knowing when those ripen as well. And then here's a couple websites that I found very helpful. But when you're researching stuff on the website, you definitely want to try to figure out where this person lives and where he's coming from and what kind of advice they might have, if it's going to be different in your kind of climate and things like that. Cool. Well, thank you all so much. That was the presentation. Like I said, it's just like an intro. I just wanted to kind of get people aware of what's kind of out there and some easy ones, and then show you some next steps to kind of becoming more urban, foragers. But definitely, I'll stick around. If anyone has any other questions, you can feel free. You can type me a question, or you can take yourself off on mute and let me know. Or if you want to add things or have any feedback or things like that too, or you can email me too as well if you think of something later on. But I'll stick around for like another 10 minutes if anyone's got any questions. Thank you all. Also, don't forget the slides. You can download. I'll repost the text if you want to download the slides. Um, yeah, definitely check us out. Check out our other classes every Tuesday and Thursday evening. A lot of really good stuff coming. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, thank you all so much. Yeah, stay safe, and yeah, we'll have the video posted up soon on the Doug website. If and feel free to email me. Yeah, definitely. Kathleen, email me about that walnuts. I'll ask around with people I know that harvest a lot of walnuts and try to figure out what's going on with your rots. But cool. Well, thank you all so much. I'm gonna go ahead and close the meeting, but feel free to send me an email later if you have any other questions.